the New Zealand session. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina kiuta, kia mā taratara ki tai, he hi aki ana te tākura he tio, he huka, he honghunga, homie, huie, tai kie. Welcome everyone, kia ora koutou, ko Kyla Colvin toku ingoa. I am the founder and chief executive of Boma New Zealand and one of the co-founders of Boma Global. And it's my very great privilege to host this final session of the Boma Global Mental and Remote Health Summit. We are obviously living in extraordinary times. We had the privilege of hosting a global summit on general topics relating to COVID-19 a few weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, I think it was. And when we were talking as a team about what is truly important at this time, the one topic that just floated right to the surface in every conversation was our mental health, our mental and emotional and spiritual well-being. And so I'm really thrilled that our global team have come together in order to generate this summit. I'm thrilled for all the hundreds and thousands of people who've tuned in. This summit started at 12 a.m. New Zealand time with a session from our partners in India. And has gone around the world. So all in, it'll be 14 hours of content, speakers from 6 different continents, and we'll be sharing all of that content on YouTube following the summit, uploading those talks so that you can rewatch them and gain new insights, new whakaaro. So today in our session, we have a relatively brief session. We're here for about an hour together, and we're going to hear from 2 extraordinary speakers. The first one is Matt Brown from My Fathers Barbers, and the second is Lucy Hone from the New Zealand Institute Center for the New Zealand Institute for Wellbeing and Resilience. The way that we're going to run it is very straightforward. We're going to hear from Matt for maybe 15 to 20 minutes. He's going to give a bit of a korero, a bit of a talk, and then we will take questions from you, from our viewers, via Facebook. You can share those questions and we will funnel them through to Matt, and we will do our level best to get to all of those questions. Once we're done with that Q&A, we'll turn it over to Lucy, hear a talk from her, and then same thing, we'll be taking your questions. Feel free to send your questions via Facebook, whether you're watching on the Boma New Zealand page or the Boma Global page. We will get your questions either way and are looking forward to hearing from you. So don't be shy, don't be whakama. Let's hear what your questions are. With that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is someone I feel so privileged to know, so privileged to have in my life, and so privileged to learn from. His name is Matt Brown, and he's the founder of My Fathers Barbers. And probably the simple way to describe him is that he cuts hair. But that is so, it's so incomplete in terms of what he actually does. What Matt does is he makes his barber's chair a sacred space for the men who come and get their hair cut with him, and creates a space for them to take off their masks and just be without judgment. It's one of the rare spaces for men to be able to do that kind of thing. And so with that, I'm going to invite Matt to unmute himself. Matt, it's so wonderful to see you. I saw a great video that you shared on Facebook earlier today with all of your My Fathers Barbers whānau handing the clippers round to each other. Matt, it's wonderful to see you. I'm going to just stop talking and turn it right over to you to hear what you've got to say.
Kia ora. Wow, can you guys hear me? I'm sure everyone can hear me. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Kyla. Such an honor to be here. This is my first, digital web speaking gig, you could say. So such an honor to be here, especially being on this massive panel of international guest speakers. So yeah, I mean, I'll get straight into it. I'm like most Kiwi men here in New Zealand, our first barber, our first hairstylist is mum and dad in your backyard. This was my first experience of barbering or getting a haircut. My first experience of visiting a barbershop and experiencing the profession that is barbering was at the age of 10. My father took me to the barbershop because his scissors were blunt. And so I remember feeling nervous and excited. excited because, you know, this was my opportunity to have a different hairstyle other than a bowl cut. But I was nervous because when we got there, the whole shop was packed full of men. But yeah, other than that, I was excited. And, you know, when it came to my turn to get a haircut, I jumped on the chair as soon as I could. And I told the barber, you know, can you please make me look like The Rock, Dwayne The Rock Johnson? Because, you know, every Polynesian kid, the people that we looked up to growing up were rugby. New Zealand's massive on rugby. And the people that looked like us had the same color skin as us were the rugby players. And so to see someone of international standard success with their caliber, The Rock was just like, you know, everyone wanted to be The Rock. And I'll never forget, you know, the barber laughing at my request. And he, you know, within minutes, he completely turned me into The Rock. I thought I was the man with the biggest sideburns. I felt so confident. And, you know, the reason why I share that little story is because there's a feeling that I felt that day that has never left me still to this day. And that was the feeling of being important. I felt valued. I felt someone listened to me. I felt someone cared. And so, you know, it's no surprise that today, 24 years later, I am a barber, a hair artist, and educator in the hair industry now for over a decade. I've had the honor, and it's been a blessing to travel the world, teaching hair cutting, teaching my craft and profession that I love so much, but more so sharing my story and talking on mental health and talking on suicide and the struggles that we men face day to day, being a man. And so I've always been aware of the immense privilege us barbers have. It's an intimate relationship between us and our clients. For some of us, it may be the only deep conversation, korero, that we ever have. And for many, it's probably the only time that someone sees them or they feel seen. And so, irrespective of culture and age, not many people are allowed in another man's space quite like this. And so it's an honor. It's always been an honor to be a barber, to have the space and hold the space for men. I've always seen the barber shop as the cornerstone of the community. Some would say the hood Twitter. I've seen my chair as a sacred and tabernacle of sorts, a space for a man to just come and be himself. So when I thought of that, I started to think, man, what could I do with that? More than just give a good haircut, I could inspire great men. But what does great men even look like when we have some of the worst statistics in the world? Here in New Zealand, we have some of the worst statistics relating to domestic violence. You know, we have police all over this country responding to calls relating to domestic violence every 3 minutes. Every 3 minutes. Yet 76% of domestic violence cases are never reported. You know, we have too many children dying at the hands of their parents. Our news headlines are filled with story after story of domestic abuse, of women being beaten to death by angry men. You know, since this pandemic, domestic violence cases around the world has risen an average of 35%. I was talking with my wife. You know, me personally, I call domestic violence the shadow pandemic. It knows no borders. You know, keep in mind that before the pandemic hit, 1 in 5 women who had ever been in a relationship with a man reported experiencing sexual and physical abuse by an intimate partner in the last year. So to say peace, yep, we have peace. The roads are quiet. You know, the traffic is dead. Families are walking around the neighborhood. To say peace when there is no peace is to say nothing. And so I'm grateful for this opportunity to be here. Thank you, Boma, for having me. But if you were anything like me, the headlines never get easier. You know, my wife, she forces herself to read every single story about the children that are killed at the hands of their family. She says their names out loud. She says that she will not ignore the reality for the children living in our backyard, in our country, even when it's not easy to acknowledge. Even when she sits there crying while she reads their horrific accounts. She even reads them out loud to me and the kids. And she does this to remind me and my family that as a family and as a community and as a business, we have a lot of work to do, because these children are our children. And we firmly believe that really there is no such thing as other people's children, because this is why our family mandate is creating violence-free communities. And so, I want to put the challenge out there. Instead of feeling discouraged about our statistics around the world, or even a bit useless, like, what can we do being locked down at home, for those of us who are in safe environments, or who have never experienced abuse from your partners or have never witnessed it. Collectively, I really believe that it's time for us as, humanity, call me optimistic, but it's time for us in whatever job we are in whatever capacity we can think about, to be part of a bigger picture, be part of a bigger solution. We can't just rely on someone else or the professionals or the government, and I'm thankful for, organizations that are out there helping our communities, but we need to start with ourselves. Our children, our problem. So when I think of being part of a solution and how that relates to me as a barber, I think about who we impact daily, and that's the men. For us, it's men. For you, you may be a hairdresser, it'll be women. Retail, you're dealing with men and women. But for us as a barbershop, we deal with men. And I think about, the kids, the wives, the partners. And when you can impact a man, you make a huge impact on his family. So in my years as a barber, talking to all kinds of men, hour after hour, I've come to realize a few things. Violent men are angry men, and angry men are disappointed men. They are sad men. They are grieving men. They are frustrated men. They are men who feel hopeless, who feel like failures, and who feel unable to express accurately their real emotions and feelings, because, growing up in this society, patriarchy society, in our culture, like when we had guests come into our home, it was always the woman that got up and served, and the men just sat there. And so when you're raised in a culture where men are hierarchy, men are powerful, men are more important, or men get served, you are taught that you're powerful. You are taught, not to express crying or those other emotions, or feeling sad or depressed or disappointed. Like, that just sounds weak. But I've learned that a majority of men I've met are wearing masks. These masks of staunch pride and anger, but underneath they are all little boys. We're all little boys who have been cut as children and are now standing here bleeding to death as adults. There are men like this everywhere, in all our cities, all over the world. Sadly, we have prisons full of them. We have men in high-powered corporate positions, and even wearing uniforms. We have guys in gang patches. We have black brothers. We have white brothers, and we have brown brothers. But I've learned that color does not discriminate against family violence and childhood trauma, nor does wealth. Because there are poor men, rich men who are bleeding everywhere, all over women and children who never cut them. So my passion to help create violence-free communities actually goes right back to my own childhood. If I could describe my childhood in one word, I would use the word unsafe. Unsafe. When you think of Christmas, you think of, the jolly season. It's everyone's giving gifts. Mum's in the kitchen cooking, the best dish that she has under her sleeve. My first memory of Christmas, I was 3 years old. I distinctly remember my father picking up the Christmas tree, and beating the shit out of my mum with it. I'll never forget that image of my mother lying on the floor in the living room with my two older brothers on top of her, trying to protect her from our angry father. It was my first experience of domestic violence, but it was also my first memory of the feeling it gave me and how it so brutally impacted my family. You know, in my opinion, there are very few safe spaces left for us men. Very few safe spaces where normal everyday men don't have to wear a mask anymore. You know, at work, we want to look competent. So put on your mask. At home, we want to be the providers. Well, freaking heck, that's gone out the window now. Put on your mask. You know, when you're with your boys, when you're with your friends, you know, we see who's the funniest jokes. We mock until we all laugh, and then someone inside is hurting. But you know, put on that mask. I want to share something with you guys that really breaks my heart. Here in New Zealand, because we're such a massive rugby nation, and especially here in my city, Christchurch, our city we're the best in New Zealand. But you know what? During an All Blacks game, our national rugby team, women's refuge centres across this nation are praying they'll win. Why? Because they know that their doorsteps will be lined up, queues of women and children after getting abused. But this isn't just about rugby. When men face a loss, disappointment, grief, regret, when we don't know how to take our mask off and be real, be human, be broken, then all we have left is anger. You know, as a barber, my first responsibility is for how my client looks on his outside person. But you do that long enough, you begin to get the unique opportunity to connect with the inside person too. You know, I've sat with some of the most staunchest, most ruthless men in my city, actually in my country, in my chair, crying together. You know, let me just put this out there. This isn't a very popular business plan or anything. You know, step 1, get a barbershop. Step 2, cry with your clients. But I don't care about digital marketing strategies or having 20 barbershops or having the best reputation in the game. I just care about making my chair a sacred space. It is my cathedral. You know, in my chair, we laugh, we debate, we talk about our kids, complain about our partners. But mostly these men they just share. They just share whoever and whatever they're going through. My aim since I began barbering was firstly to keep myself real, having the daily courage to show up and be real and be vulnerable, be authentic to who I am. And I believe when I've done this, it's given other men permission to do the same. You know, I've calculated that I've been talking to men now, cutting here, for over 25,000 hours, which is some pretty hefty research. You know, cool. I should have a PhD in this, really. And so in my years of talking, cutting, and hanging out with men, I've come to realize a few things. And I'm going to list 7 points. Point 1, many of us do not know what real love is. Heaps of us think abuse is love because, unfortunately, that's all we've ever seen. Point 2, we are too scared to be vulnerable and even attempt to take our masks off because, shucks, when we have done so in the past, we've been really hurt by the people we thought would love us. 3, we don't know how to trust people. So we either give them trust in areas too quickly, in all areas too much, or we don't trust them at all. Neither really give us what we really want. 4, we struggle. We don't know how to communicate our needs with those we're in a relationship with. And then we get angry when they don't give us when they don't give us what we really want. 5, we constantly interact with those closest to us from a place of our unhealed trauma. 6, we build walls. We build many walls instead of practicing boundaries. And 7, we have no idea of how to even begin to heal our own pain, but yet we somehow expect someone else can. There's a word in Māoridom, in the indigenous culture of our country, which goes by the word whanaungatanga. What do you call it? To put that in simple terms in English, whanaungatanga means relationship. Relationship. That's what we can all give. Instead of depending on our governments, who, you know, we're so grateful for the help that a lot of these organizations offer us, why can't we just start with ourselves and our neighbor? Why can't you just start with yourself and the person that you work with, or start with the people in your bubble? Do relationship. Learn each other's history. You know, for me and my wife, we've had hard conversations. She's awesome at asking me, you know, questions about my childhood, and, you know, although some of it does re-trigger a lot of my trauma and a lot of my pain, we've learned how to hold space for each other. And holding space for men, especially when us men, we love to fix shit. We like to, you know, build things. We like to, you know, put the nail on the coffin, you know, solve the solutions. Honestly, the best thing you can do for anyone, for your partner, for your friends, is just to listen and try not say anything. Sometimes saying nothing is the best answer. Sometimes saying nothing is the best solution to the problem. And I know I've experienced this firsthand with my wife, my best friend. I've experienced this with the men that I look up to and have in my life now. They just know how to hold space, and holding space is not trying to fix. It's not trying to have a solution or have an answer. Sometimes holding space, majority, the best way you can hold space is just listening. You know, they say that every boy measures his masculinity at the deepest level against his father. You know, my masculinity had taken a beating, and who could I connect with? You know, not with my father, not with the priest that I went to church with, that you know, molested me at the age of 10. Not with my uncle, who was the youth leader at church, who you know, was there to help me, and, you know, chose to rape me at the age of 13. You know, a lot of our men are suffering in silence. And the reason why I share my trauma is because I want men out there, and if you're listening, that, you know, you're not the only one going through it, or you're not the only one that's gone through pain. But, you know, I sit here today as a man who has done the work, who is still doing the work, because healing takes a lifetime. But it's beautiful. It's beautiful. You know, I can walk through my doors. I love walking through my doors after work every day and seeing my kids run up to me yelling, "Daddy, Daddy," you know, fighting for my attention, who's going to jump on me first, or, you know, who's they going to hug first. And I love that, and it brings so much healing, because I don't ever remember feeling that way towards my father. But to get to where I'm at today, you know, it's taken work. You know, when you're in pain like I was, your natural reaction is to stay behind your mask and pretend. Yeah, bro, I'm all good. Nothing's wrong with me. You know, I'm hard as, cuz, you know, nothing's wrong here. But I had to find someone, and I had to be real, because suicide was my best friend. It knocked on my door constantly every day. But I had to ask for help, and I had to find the right person and say, "Frick, this is me. This is who I am. I need help. And if you're not going to love me for my ugly, then next." And when I finally had the courage to do this, first with my close friends, then my wife, then I went and seen therapists and counselors. I learned that since most of our pain comes from relationships, so does our healing. Since most of our pains come through relationships, so does our healing. So will your healing. So yeah, it's hard work to see the man behind the mask, but I'm telling you, behind every angry man, is a young boy, is a little boy inside who's just longing to be seen. Behind every hurt, confused man that lashes out in anger, there's a young boy in there who thought, he wasn't good enough, who felt abandoned, who felt rejected. For where I'm at now in my life, I'm in a good place. I love my dad to bits. The healing has happened there. But yeah, that's me. I think I've spoken for a bit too long. But hopefully, Kyla, if you're out there, you want to come along and join me?
I'm here. You definitely have not spoken for too long, Matt. I don't think I've ever heard you speak that it hasn't brought tears to my eyes, gone right to my heart. And there are a couple of, Rosaria, I might ask you to bring us back to side-by-side view here. There are a couple of things that I noticed from your talk that I just want to kind of highlight to bring to the forefront. So one is, that you talked about how we learn how to love from what we've seen when we're kids, and how you saw a version of love that looked like violence, that looked like abuse, that looked like molestation. And one of the things that I loved so much about your mahi is that what you're doing is you are showing people that that is not the only version of love, and in fact not even close to the best version of love, right? That you're showing, you're just by your very existence and by the way that you're showing up in the world, you are serving as a role model, and not in the sense of like a basketball superstar way, but in the sense of like you are demonstrating through the way that you are that this is what manliness can look like. This is what masculinity can look like. This is what it means to be a man. So first I want to acknowledge you for that.
Thank you.
I also wanted to, and I know we have a heap of questions coming through Facebook, so I'm going to get to those in just a second. I also wanted to touch on something, which is, every time I hear you speak, you bring out these statistics that are so shocking that, globally, we have, increased the domestic violence incidents by 35% since this started. You mentioned the other day in New Zealand, the number has skyrocketed. That 1 in 5 women have been the victim of domestic violence incidents. And I was reminded that when the lockdown first started, I saw a tweet that said, sure, it's easy to work from home if you own your own home and if you have, somewhat grown, standardly abled children who are largely able to look after themselves, and this is the critical bit, and a loving, non-abusive partner who is willing to look after the home. And for me, that tweet was such a reminder that yes, we are all in this together, but there are huge inequities across Aotearoa New Zealand, across the world, in terms of how it's going to affect us and how we're going to respond. And so I guess the first question that I have for you, I'm going to steal the first one because I've got the mic, but then I'll turn to the Facebook ones. The first question that I have for you is, what are you seeing in terms of the conversations in your community? You're obviously not cutting hair at the moment. What are you seeing in terms of how people are responding to this? And specifically, what are some constructive responses that you're seeing specifically as they relate to domestic violence?
In our community, me and my wife, we started an organization called She Is Not Your Rehab. And although it sounds like it's just targeted at, using women, but it's the concept of a lot of us use substances, sports, food, whatever, to rehabilitate us. And our approach always is inviting men to heal, inviting men to do the work, because there's so many organizations out there that are a safe harbor or that create safe spaces to protect our women, to protect the abused. But then for us, like, we need something for our men, because we don't always want abusers. Prison is full of humans who are traumatized and have acted out from their pain. So we need to create a space online, which is where we started our movement, where men feel safe enough to open up and talk and tell us their trauma, tell us their pain, or even if they are committing domestic violence, abuse at home. And so a lot of guys are writing in and telling us, you know, that they've hit their partner, they've done it in the past, they want to stop. You know, the general answer is lock them up, put them in prison. But again, when you put traumatized people around traumatized people, when you put hurt people with hurt people, they're going to come out and hurt more people, you know. So you heal people need to heal people. So surround people with good insight, good truth coaching. Yeah, so we try and come from a positive approach to it, and that's inviting our men. Like, you know, all of us have gone through some sort of pain. Like, let's do this together. That's our approach on it, and that's what we're talking about in our community. But in saying that, also, like, we've had like teenagers, children write into us, and are scared. You know, it's home is a war zone, and so our reply to them is just to, you know, it's all right for you to ask. It's not your responsibility to parent mum and dad, but it's your responsibility to take care of yourself. And if you need to ask for help, you pick up that phone and you ring the authorities, you ring the police, you ring the organizations that are there to protect you. And yeah. Does that answer your question?
It does. It does. It leads pretty well into the next question. We've got at least two questions that are roughly the same. And I know I have the same feeling in my heart, which is, how can we help for people who are not directly experiencing domestic violence? How can we help? Are there any organizations or groups we can be supporting to help people living with domestic violence? Like, what can anyone watching do right now in order to be constructive?
Honestly, please, Women's Refuge are struggling at the moment to have facilities to cater to our women and children, and so funding is everything. They're, you know, they support themselves, and so there's a link if you go onto their website where you can donate money. $20 will give one family one night in a hotel. So you could do that. In the bigger picture, I think it needs to start with ourselves. Like, start with your own community, your Facebook friends. Start a Facebook group where you just keep that space open for your friends to talk, and get past the how are you doing. You know, ask the questions, ask the hard questions. Are you struggling with anything? Are you going through depression? You know, how are you finding it being by yourself? Don't just take I'm good for an answer. Keep asking the questions, because people, especially men, we suffer in our silence because we don't want to bother anyone. You know, I'll fix this myself. But we need help from outside of ourselves.
And this tension right now, you know, you talked about that pressure on men to be the provider and to be staunch and to be in charge. And in this context in particular, where, you know, anyone who has a fix-it, like I'm in charge and I'm strong, nature will be struggling so much, because what we're experiencing, we cannot fix. And the solution is not to step up and be strong, but to actually stand down and retreat. And so the tension there is, you know, just greater than maybe it's ever been. I saw on the Aviva website the other day, which also works for violence-free communities here in Otautahi, Christchurch. I saw that they've lost, I think it's about 30% of their funding, because a big chunk of their funding comes from a massive fundraiser event that they do, and which obviously they can't do anymore. So I would really just tautoko, like, support your comment. And I think women's refuges, you know, there will, for people tuning in from anywhere in the world, there will be women's refuges and similar organizations anywhere in the world. And so, you know, find the one that's local to you and reach out and support them. They will all need that kind of support.
Definitely. And for our men out there, there's organizations out there called Hey Bro. If you need someone to talk to, someone who's honestly, and you think that you're ringing up talking to, I don't know, men language, this is men's language, a jackass who has never experienced what you've gone through, trust me, these guys are professionals on the other side who have gone through similar experiences, who are empathetic. Honestly, just pick up the phone and call them. Hey Bro, Safe to Talk, Shine, Aviva, Women's Refuge, they're out there. Yeah.
Do any of them, we had a question coming in from Facebook, do any of them support the family as a whole unit?
Aviva do. Aviva here in Christchurch. They have a real holistic approach to dealing with domestic violence. So
Mm.
they come into your home and kind of like safeguard your home, you know, protect it, keep the abuser out, but then they work with the men as well to not abuse and to heal and to heal that inner child that yeah.
And you were doing some online sessions, weren't you?
Yes.
So can you give us we'll close this part of our session with a share us that information.
Cool. So you just jump onto our Facebook or our Instagram. We're doing Facebook, Instagram called She Is Not Your Rehab. We do live discussions, live chats with different people around the world, psychologists, therapists. We're working on a series, but a lot of people are writing to us. We have hundreds of messages from people writing to us who are feeling unsafe right now, and we're releasing up our responses to that every day. So no matter what walk of life you're from, you can relate to it. So
awesome. Matt, thank you
so
so much. Love your mahi. We got a comment from the audience. Love your mahi so much. I have to agree with that one. I could have written it myself, but I was here talking to you. Please just keep up that wonderful work. And we're so lucky and grateful to have you in our lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. Love you. Take care.
Love you. Take good care, my friend. All right. Wow. That was an incredibly powerful talk from a wonderful man whose heart is bigger than this pandemic, I genuinely believe. And it gives me great pleasure to be able to segue from that conversation into our next one, into our next speaker, who is equally a massive treasure, a massive taonga for New Zealand, who has been through her own share of hardship, who has both academic, research-backed, theoretical expertise, as well as lived expertise in terms of resilience and well-being. Another dear friend and wonderful human being, the wonderful Lucy Hone from the New Zealand Institute for Wellbeing and Resilience. Lucy, kia ora, welcome.
Kia ora, Kyla, kia ora koutou. It's great to be with you today. So I'm going to just get talking, am I?
You're absolutely over to you to begin your conversation.
Awesome. So I'm just going to share my screen with you, hopefully successfully to start off with, and Kyla can tell me whether that's worked. Yep, that's all good. So it is my great pleasure just to talk to you for, I don't know, I'm not very scripted, about kind of 20 minutes about my pet topic, which is resilience. What do we know about it? How can we build it? And what I'm hoping to do, because I spent the last 10 years studying resilience, what I'm hoping to do today with you guys is just give you some kind of top line findings. And you've got 20 minutes about what resilience is, how we can promote it, give you some practical strategies and some resources too. So I guess just to kind of put you in the picture, it's good for me to start with my own relationship with this fuzzy topic. You know, I come from Otautahi, Christchurch, and frankly we're all sick of the word resilience. We've had a hell of a 10 years and trying to get back on our feet in that post-quake environment, and we've had the terrible mosque shootings, and now we have the COVID pandemic. So let me just start off by saying, I'm just going to give you a very quick backstory to my own relationship with this concept. And then what I'm hoping to do is just make it kind of take the fuzziness out of it and give you some facts. So I went to study resilience at the University of Pennsylvania over 10 years ago now, because I was already kind of wound up by the word even back then. You know, I already found that it was, if I look back, it was after the global financial crisis, everyone was talking about resilience. And I remember thinking, wow, does anyone actually know what this word means? So I've made it my, my life kind of quest in the last 10 years to understand more about it. So I went over to Pennsylvania, and it was an awesome time to be there, because when I turned up there in 2009, they had just picked up the contract to train all 1.1 million American soldiers to be as mentally fit as they have traditionally been physically fit. And so for someone like me, whose main quest is, how do we take those scientific findings out of academia? There's a huge body of evidence now, of robust scientific evidence informing resilience, recovery, well-being science. But what I want to know is, how do we take the best of the findings and bring them to our everyday lives to be useful? So I just finished my master's over there in Philadelphia, and I'd come back here, just started on my doctoral research when the Christchurch earthquakes hit. So that was my first opportunity to put this training that I'd had to the test. The training specifically I'd had was around the Penn Resilience Program and the Military Resilience Program. And both of those have been shown empirically, you know, by robust studies, that you can actually build resilience. So I brought that kind of body of knowledge back and worked with my own community to try and help people here get back on their feet in that post-quake environment. I thought that was my resilience calling, and sadly, as some of you will know, I was wrong, because in 2014 we then hit personal tragedy when we went to bike the Alps to Ocean, the beautiful mountain bike trail down in Ohau. And when we arrived there, a policeman came and told us that our dear 12-year-old daughter Abby, who'd been coming down in a separate car, had been involved in a car accident, and 3 of them were killed tragically on the road at Rakaya. So I have this terrible, bizarre, macabre kind of relationship with resilience. You know, I've done the study, I've done the professional application, and over the last almost 6 years now, I've had to live and breathe this material. The good news is that I can say that where I first had my doubts about it, when I had to do the initial training, there were some aspects of that training that I'd almost say were too American for me. Boy, has it proved. Yeah, I just don't think I would have functioned over the last 6 years in the way that I have been able to without that training. So I feel really strongly now that we all need to understand the dynamic processes that enable us to be resilient when the shit hits the fan better than we do. So with that kind of in mind, I'm just going to share with you some of the research that we know about this. So firstly, we know that humans have 4 uses for resilience. They help us navigate and overcome the traumas of early childhood. And interestingly, about what Matt has just said, really we know also from the research that you only need one adult to be there for you. One strong, supportive, caring, listening adult will make such a substantial difference in anybody's young life. So, you know, anybody who's ever thinking of mentoring, doing that, Pillars, Brothers, Sisters, and the other organizations that Matt mentioned, you know, really, I urge you to do that. So the second use is, it's the daily crappy bits, you know, the person who in our normal lives nicked your parking space, or the printer that doesn't work. And right now we can all think of manifold ways in which our daily lives are stressed, and that we're having to deal with what we call real-time resilience. So, you know, this is the ways you think and act that help you navigate the sometimes petty, sometimes real moments in your everyday life. And then it also helps us adapt to the big stuff. And by this, I am talking about redundancy, divorce, physical impairment, suicide, infertility, all of those things. So these first 3 are about how we react to events that happen to us. And the last one, I really like this because it's kind of sort of spins a different approach, because we also know that resilience is really important for how we are proactive. You know, everybody who's online right now is demonstrating this. You're all reaching out. You're all interested, curious, wanting to learn more. You're carving a different future. So those are the 4 uses of resilience. And essentially we know that it very much comes to a large degree from how we choose to think and how we choose to act. Now, having just sat here and listened to Matt's talk and all of his insights, of course it, makes me draw attention to the fact that while we're all in lockdown at the moment and we're all in what we call in New Zealand our bubbles, as Kyla also said, all of those bubbles, are not created equal. And some people's bubbles are a lot harder to live with. Some people are swimming in really toxic ponds. So I'm not talking about those people right now. I'm talking about the rest of us who still need to be resilient. We still need to find ways of thinking and acting that either work for us or don't work for us during this time. So we know that resilience isn't a fixed trait, and it does come from these kind of in the moment, daily, momentary decisions you make all day long. Just to give you an example of the kind of studies that we look at to get this research, I thought I'd share Dennis Charney's study with you. So what I love about this is that Dennis Charney from Mount Sinai University Medical School, he's one of the new wave of psychology researchers. And he did this study back in 2005 where he went and tracked down the American airmen who had been in prison in the Hanoi Hilton, the notorious awful prison during the Vietnam War. Some of these American airmen were held captive there for 6 to 8 years. And what he did was he particularly wanted to look at the airmen who had not got PTSD or depression in the years since their imprisonment. So he's a new wave of researchers in that he's not just looking at PTSD, he's actually looking at people who didn't get PTSD and what were there through doing long form interviews, any particular kind of common characteristics that they shared. And it turns out this is his kind of list. I'm just going to click through these slowly for you now. And I hope that when you look at this list, you can see how kind of very ordinary some of these processes are, these ways of thinking and acting. One of the earliest researchers in the field is called Anne Marston, and she refers to resilience as ordinary magic. And I really love that phrase. Karen Rivich, who trained us and who was doing the comprehensive soldier fitness training for the US Army, she used to say to us that resilience is like a stew. It's a whole hodgepodge of ingredients, of different ways of thinking and acting. And like any stew, we all make them up differently. And so you might have plentiful supply of some of these ingredients in your store cupboard, and you might be running a bit low on others. And that's okay. So you don't have to, if you went through this and gave yourself a little, tick cross checklist, you don't have to have ticked off every single one of these. It is a whole amalgam of processes. So, but what worries me, everyone who's listening, and Kyla and co, is that I don't think we have very high levels of what we would call well-being literacy. And I think in our work, it becomes readily apparent how little people know about how to look after their mental health. So we asked this question in a study back in 2016. We asked people, what do you currently do for your well-being? And if I had you as a live audience now, I'd ask you all this. And chances are, whenever we do this, and I do this in training all the time, this is what people come back and say to us. That predominantly, when you ask someone what they do for their well-being, they list different ways of physical activity. They say, oh, I hang out with my friends. Some of them say a few hobbies. You might get we're getting a bit of a smattering of mindfulness in there. But actually, when I look at this list, what really interests me about it is that to a large degree, these are the public health messages that we have been giving you for eons, which means you're paying attention. But the problem is, as we all know, as we're living in lockdown right now, you can't do all of these all the time. And even in everyday life, when you're having a run-in with your boss or your teenager's driving you mad, you can't just sprint off for a run, or you can't go and immediately practice mindfulness. So our thinking is that we need a much more psychological approach to how we look after ourselves. We all need to understand the ways of thinking and acting that enable us to feel good and function well. And incidentally, feeling good and functioning well, that is our, the chosen definition of well-being. That comes from Corey Keyes. So with that in mind, I thought I'd just give you a few of my kind of tips. These are the things that my go-to strategies, which I hope may help some of you right now. They're all evidence-based, and these are the things that have kind of seen me through, and I've seen resonate with other people when we do our training over the last decade. So the first one is just purely, it might sound lame, but to understand that struggle is actually, sadly and terribly, part of all of our lives. And the importance here is that when you understand this, it stops you from feeling discriminated against. You don't find yourself thinking, oh, why me? Because instead you realize that tough things happen to us all. Adversity doesn't discriminate, and right now that's more obvious than ever, isn't it? While we know that everyone's bubbles, aren't equal, we are certainly all being put in a situation that is unprecedented, and we are having to draw deep. So the second is that we know from resilience research that resilient people are really somehow good at choosing where they focus their attention. They have this ability, either innate or learned, because these are learnable skills. They have this ability of being able to choose to focus their attention, their resources, their psychological, social, physical resources on the things that they can change, and somehow accept the stuff that they can't change. Easy to say, not so easy to do. I absolutely agree. But the point is that resilience is, our genes are not our destiny. We can train even the most die-hard pessimists to catch that pessimistic negativity bias thinking and ask themselves, here's the next one, ask themselves, is this helping or harming me? So this is the third strategy, just to build your self-awareness of what works for you by asking yourself, is the way I'm thinking or is the way I'm acting helping or harming me in my quest to get through this as best I can in the moment? And I think for us all right now, this is such a powerful strategy. It is underpinned by cognitive behavioral therapy, which is really well respected, really effective training. So I've been applying this to myself in my own life when I trawl through Instagram in the evening and I feel like everybody else is doing much better in their home bubbles than ours. When I look at other people's amazing whatever, you look on WhatsApp and see other people who are kind of doing TikTok dancing and amazing recipes and puzzles and all these things. So I imply this all the time to, should I have a, fourth or fifth glass of wine? Should I drag my teenage son out of bed before lunchtime, when really, is that actually going to help or harm me in my quest to get some work done today? So those are just some kind of insights into my ridiculous life. And then finally, and I wrote a piece and stuff last week on this about ways to prevent yourself from catastrophizing. And catastrophizing is just when we have that kind of runaway train thinking, when we absolutely, we go to the worst case scenario, we jump to conclusions, and we go from watching the nightly news to suddenly thinking that the worst is going to happen and we're not going to pay our mortgage and we're going to be out on the streets and lose our homes and everything is going to end. So the solution to that is really just to slow your thinking down. And to, sometimes what I do is ask myself, okay, what is the best case scenario here? What is the worst case scenario here? What is the most likely scenario is probably something in the middle that I haven't even thought up yet. So those are my 4 strategies that they form the kind of the biggest part of my resilience toolkit at the moment. And my challenge, my action to you all today is to go and try it. Be yourself, own self-experiment, try something out. We know from wellbeing science that person activity fit is key. Work out what works for you. Ultimately, it comes down to this, that mental agility, being able to kind of flex and look at the ways you are thinking and acting and how that's working for you, that forms, it's a real key resilience competency. So particularly when I'm overwhelmed at the moment, when there's lots of work, there's lots of people, there's lots going on, there's lots of news, this is the thing that keeps me grounded. So I just look at this all the time and think, okay, does this matter, this thing I'm thinking about? Can I control it? Okay, yeah, it does matter and I can control it. So then I've got this kind of little black area in the middle and I think, okay, that's what I've got to focus my attention on. Now, let's prioritize. Really, really great tool for prioritization when you've got a lot going on, a lot of tabs open in our heads. So I'm finding that really useful too. So I don't want to diminish the fact that environment does play a part in our resilience. You know, it's really hard to be resilient if you are sleeping on the street, sleeping in a car, being beaten by your partner. But for those of us that are not in that terrible scenario, there are so many ways we can help ourselves by the ways we think and the ways we act. So finally, just some resources that I've put together that I think will be linked on the slides, or we're going to share them afterwards. So the top left is Dr. Denise Quinlan, my co-director at the Institute. She wrote a great piece and we did a webinar on it last week about staying sane and kind in your bubble, because she wrote a blog called Not Killing Nigel, Nigel being her husband. So in all of our work, we try and be really real. You know, none of this is easy. And the other piece here, particularly kind of thinking about today's session, Boma session, is about mental and remote health. So we also have, bottom left, a piece which we've put together about just some insights on what we have seen work for people when they've been forced to work from homes, for team leaders. It's tough leading a team when you are working from home, when you can't see what's going on behind closed doors. So, and there are books and on the link to our website, and there's lots more resources there. So that's all from me. Thanks very much to all of the Boma team for inviting me along today. It's great to have a moment to talk to you all.
Lucy, thank you so much. That was absolutely fantastic. So I know we've got some questions that have come through. I definitely have a big question for you, which relates to the Charney research that you referenced, and all of the characteristics that those folks had in common. And of course, the first one was optimistic thinking. And one of the stories that I'm familiar with is the story of Admiral Jim Stockdale, who spent 7.5 years in the Hanoi Hilton. And who is famous for the Stockdale paradox, which is that optimism on its own can potentially actually be detrimental to our mental well-being, and that what we need is the kind of combination of the total faith that we will prevail in the end with, as he calls it, the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of our reality, whatever they may be. That's
Yeah.
a concept I've come back to again and again and again. And so I just want to check in with you in terms of the Charney research, like how well those two concepts gel, and, you know, any insights you've got there.
Yeah, so actually on my pretty simple slide, I didn't go into realistic optimism, but Charney does go into that in his research. And as you say, that's where the Stockdale paradox comes from. And in our training, I was trained to think of realistic optimism. And certainly what we know is that you don't want to be that runaway Pollyanna optimist. You know, it is completely not helpful, non-resilient thinking to be thinking right now, oh, this is all going to be a breeze. Everything will go back to, you know, normal next week. And, oh, we've all survived lockdown. Because frankly, we know from, particularly in Christchurch, we know that this is a marathon, not a sprint. And I totally agree with you, Kyla, how important it is to be really realistic about the enormity of the task ahead, while not quashing hope. And it's such a dance, you know, that is a real, there's a couple of what I would say dances within resilience. The other is, you know, that all the time we're extolling people to focus all their attention on the things that they can control. And yet at the same time, we have to acknowledge that so much is beyond our control. And we have to learn to live with that vulnerability and being comfortable as you can with the fact that it is uncomfortable and uncertain. And so yeah, you don't want to be a rampant pessimist, you don't want to be a runaway optimist. I totally agree with you. You've got to be grounded in reality, but never giving up hope. You've just got to believe that somehow, if we put one foot in front of the other, day in, day out, week in, week out, we will prevail. And I love that part of the Stockdale paradox, that they also totally acknowledges that you have to have a survivor mission.
Yeah.
You know, you've just got to be determined to do whatever it takes to get through. And for lots of people, that might be retraining, it might be moving, you know, moving regions. But that is the kind of determination that really we do see in the resilience research.
Yeah. And particularly, and I guess one of the reasons that I wanted to make sure that I highlighted that in the context of a pandemic, there's of course a risk that optimism on its own could potentially be dangerous, because if I feel optimistic that I'm not going to get this, or that it's not going to be that bad, or that the models are you know, they're overstating things, then I might not be as inclined to do what's necessary to cope with the brutal facts of our reality, which is that, number one, you could get it. Number two, whether you get it or not, the more interactions we have, the more people will get it. Number three, that, you know, what we're seeing in New Zealand is that the actions that we've taken are working. And so, you know, to be kind of committed to those actions. So just, you know, reinforcing that, that dance, as you call it, which is so challenging and so essential for all of us.
Yeah.
We have another question, which is, Lucy, would you like to see more well-being literacy in the public health messaging that we're seeing at the moment?
Oh, actually, yeah. So I thought you were going to say public health. So I've got a couple of answers to this.
Okay.
So would I like to see more wellbeing literacy in the public health messaging? I might be a bit biased because I'm in Otatahi, Christchurch, so I'm really familiar with the All Right ? Campaign's work, which came out of the post-quake environment, which is a public health social media campaign, which is absolutely underpinned by wellbeing science. It is strengths-based, it has growth mindset in there, it has, it's just the most brilliant public health campaign that is designed to build wellbeing literacy. So if you haven't seen that, get onto their website, sign up to them on all their social media channels. And on the back of that, they also have all that amazing Sparklers work, which is for primary aged and now probably up to kind of about 13-year-olds for our tamariki as well, to help them through this. But would I like to see more wellbeing in the public health system? Yes, I would. I feel that I'm going to go out on a limb and say this in public, that we work a lot with education, and the education sector really understands the importance of growing competence, knowledge and capacity around wellbeing and resilience. Certainly down here in Otatahi they do. But we have often said that health will be the last sector to come to us to assist with that building of wellbeing literacy. They're so entrenched in the deficit model of pathology that I don't really believe that they get it. I think they think that this is still fluffy science and doesn't make a lot of difference. So yep, that's my challenge to them.
Awesome. And maybe final question, what are, if any, some daily rituals? Actually, it's not the final question because I'm going to keep the final question for myself. What daily rituals do you put in place when you yourself are feeling especially low on the resilience front?
So I'm blessed in that my mother, for whatever reason, taught me and brought me up to the fact that any day I manage to have a nap is a good day. And wow, honestly, it's just such an amazing way to give me the self-compassion to lower the bar and give myself a break. So I've been sleeping a lot, and that really helps me. I also rely on my Kindle in the middle of the night. If I wake up and my thoughts are racing and I'm doing that catastrophizing, then I firmly pick up my Kindle and think, don't think, don't think, don't think. And I'm getting out every day, however much I don't want to. Some days, end of long Zoomy days, I kind of just want to go straight to the fridge and get the wine, but I have been making myself get out, and there's nothing like it really, just for separating yourself from work, from home.
Yeah, awesome. I read that being exhausted is a really natural physiological response right now, that we're all in the midst of a crisis, which is producing all sorts of adrenaline and cortisol and all sorts of stuff in our bodies, and that our natural response to crisis is fight, flight, or freeze, and we can't fight and we can't flee, and so we're basically just, our bodies are going, well, all we can do is freeze. And so being exhausted and wanting to take, long naps and or sleep extra long is a totally normal.
It's exhausting. I mean, I think that it's the marathon, not a sprint, is such important public health messaging right now.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so the final question is really more, I'm going to use you as my personal self-validation here, if that's okay with you. But you touched on those messages for leaders who have suddenly found themselves leading remote teams, and we're in that position at Boma, New Zealand. We switched to being a remote team a few weeks back, as everyone else did. And one of the things that we put into place that I think was really essential, one of the things we noticed when we switched to being a remote team was just how much we lost in terms of non-transactional encounters with each other, non-transactional moments of, relational exchange. And so we've put into place, we now do a daily check-in that's just a space to talk about whatever that is not about projects that we've got going or tactics or next steps or anything like that. So it's kind of a two-part. The first is the self-validation, what do you reckon about that? But actually a more robust question is, any other suggestions as to how we can ensure that we're building those robust relationships that, rely so heavily on the, oh, hey, I noticed you look a little bit sad. Are you feeling okay? Or, oh, can I get you a coffee from the kitchen when I go? Like all of those kind of tiny exchanges that build our relationships into what they are.
Yeah, so you make a really important point, and we do miss those kind of micro moments when we're all working remotely. So in our team at the Institute, we always work remotely. We've got people all over the country. And one of the things that I hadn't really thought about, but you've just brought my attention to it, is that we often have what we would kind of call between conversations. So if we work a lot on Zoom, but quite often Denise or Sally or Adrian and I will pick up the phone and phone each other. We've noticed this recently, that you have to remember you can use the phone for other things other than Snapchat, email and WhatsApp. Who knew you could actually make a phone call? And that's that's kind of been good. So we have our Zoom meetings for our, what you'd say, you know, your transactional work, but we also sometimes, in fact, Denise and I had a wine together on Zoom last night because we just wanted to shoot the breeze. So making some time for that, acknowledging that you have to do that, and that is really valuable, but also being flexible enough to work out when are the opportunities and times that will work for every member of your team, because that, of course, is so different for everybody. On top of that, we've been doing some training this week with a couple of organizations around manner enhancing conversations. You know, what is the language that works for you, Kyla, for Kit, for me? You know, how do we, Denise said to me, she doesn't want to say to me, can we cancel that meeting because I've completely hit the wall? She says she wants to say to me, can we change that meeting because I want to prioritize my well-being today? So just knowing the language that works for you. And the other really important thing, I think, for leaders of teams, any kind of middle management, or everyone actually to understand right now, is to know to identify your important work. And we always call it important work. You know, each day, what are the 2 or 3 tasks that are really important, that have to be done, that will make you feel good, that will give you that sense of mastery, that will keep burnout at bay. And then on the second layer of that is knowing not only what your important work is, but when are your opportunities, most realistic opportunities in the week that you will get those done. You know, my peak hour is sort of 8 till 9 in the morning. Well, I'm not really being able to do that at the moment. So I've got to then carve out a different time. So that goes back to that same psychological flexibility, really.
Awesome. Lucy, I'm just going to close with a final comment from Betsy, who's watching online, who says, and I'm sharing this so that others might hear it as well. She's looking at your website and loves the idea of a whānau quiz night. So, so that one's hit home for Betsy. So Lucy, thank you so much for your insights, for your work, for your mahi, for your presence. It's been really fantastic to have you as part of our session.
Ka kite. Really appreciate it, Kyla.
Thank you. Take good care.
Bye.
Right, and that brings us to the end of the Boma Global Mental and Virtual Health Summit. I do have, of course, a few folks that I would like to thank. Before that, I will just say you can go to boma.global and subscribe to our newsletter. We'll be sending out our speaker tools and suggested resources, any of the links that our speakers have shared throughout the full 14 hours, the key takeaways from the full 14 hours, any calls to action that any of those speakers shared. And of course, we will be processing all of our talks and uploading them to the Boma Global YouTube. So you'll be able to watch those after the fact. These events take an absolutely massive number of people to pull off. And so I want to acknowledge all those folks without whom it would be totally impossible to run something like this, both globally and